you, and good morning to everybody on this second day of the Impact Days. For those that have heard me at this occasion in previous years, they do know already that this is my favorite conference of all. And it's hence also not a surprise or a coincidence that this is my first conference in person that I'm attending in 18 months. It is my favorite conference because of the authenticity and of the genuinity that it has, but obviously also a little bit because for me it feels a little bit like home, being here in Austria, even if my real home is still separated by this mountain called Semmering. I'm from the other side. But nevertheless, being here today compared to the previous years feels different. It feels different and it feels almost a little bit weird, I have to say, because in those 18 months that we have got behind us, I think we all had a lot of opportunity to reflect and to go into introspection and actually also assess our relationship with what is happening around us. And I have to say, I've been thinking also a lot about this movement of impact investing, which I had the privilege of kicking off at the European Investment Fund some 10 years ago. And I was reflecting, how do we actually see all this, what is happening in the light of where our society stands today? And I am aware that I've been preaching for 15 years almost now, the 10 commandments of impact investing, alongside great minds like Charlie or Ronnie Cohen. And then Charlie has shared with us, I think as one of the first ones, the virtue of impact in an investment portfolio, and that you can actually do very great things with that. And one of those commandments that we were preaching was that in pursuing impact, you don't have to make a trade-off. And it was precisely at this commandment that I was looking, and I said, well, if you look at it from today's perspective, I think we are wrong. Or at least we need to admit that we are no longer right. And the reason why we are no longer right is that if we look in the face of reality, we need to admit that what we are doing is no longer good enough. It is no longer good enough that we have a CO2 neutral portfolio. It is no longer good enough that we have 100% of our assets directed to impact. It is no longer good enough if we manage to beat the performance benchmark of public equity indices. Because if the system of our planet collapses, it won't help us if we are out there and say, you see, we told you. And in the light of this evolution, we need to admit to something which is probably a pretty cruel truth. That there is a major trade-off that we need to make. And if we put on one side of the equation our own survival, our own sustainability as a human race on a livable planet, we need to ask ourselves the question, what are we ready to put on the other side of that equation? And will that, what we are ready to put there, be enough? It is not enough to direct all our money to clean technologies, new projects, sustainable business models. As long as we've got 80% of the assets of brownfield assets that are out there in the market already that continue to exist and operate. And at the same time, we need to admit that if we just out there to dilute that problem by adding new clean assets but not solving the stock that is out there already, diluting the problem will not solve it. Because when we go down the route of sustainability, at the end of the day, the floods that we've been experiencing hitting Europe all over the place over the last couple of months is not going to stop at the courtyard of the impact investor. Crops seeded by impact investors are not going to sustain better the drought of 40, 50, 60 degrees of heat that we've been experiencing. Nor will bushfires stop at the plantations of impact investors. If the system goes down, we are part of it. So we need to find ways of dealing with that transition and the associated cost that goes with it, as much as we have to find opportunities and ways how we compensate those actors, stakeholders, players, protagonists that create positive value to society and today are not remunerated for it. How can they sustain if you don't find a way to remunerate them? So, what does that mean in practice? Because it's always pretty easy to talk about what should be done. And I think we all agree that anybody who is on the pitch of a football field, the worst person to have is the line judge, who never takes responsibility, but always has something to say what went wrong on the pitch. And I think we should not confine ourselves to the role. So we need to reflect on what does that mean concretely if we need to step up our game. Let me start with the most privileged community that we've got in the room today here. It's the community of the entrepreneurs. And yes, you're probably now gonna start throwing tomatoes at me and saying that this is a pretty arrogant breakout there, because it's true. I've never created a company myself. All I've achieved so far is that I managed to buy a few stakes in brilliant ideas that I was not brilliant enough to have myself. But yet I'm saying that you are the really privileged community because as an entrepreneur, you've never been facing a more fertile environment to pursue what you're born for, which is to change the world. There never has been a bigger urgency around you to rely on you and to adopt the brilliance of your thoughts. But it also comes with a huge token of responsibility, because if we all rely on you, it means that if you screw it up, bless us. And then there's the stakeholder community of the public sector. I know we've got a lot of debate what is doable, what is politically acceptable, what can society take in terms of change, what can politicians take in order to survive the next elections. And we've got this debate going on in our neighbor country here, Germany, in the run-up of the elections, but it's a universal topic. And I think the truth that we avoid in that debate is, what are we doing with what blocks us from transition. And what blocks us from transition is the wall of stranded assets that we are having out there in the market. Because we cannot wait until the end of the life cycle of those assets to act. Yet, that's what we're currently doing. And then we come to our beloved community of impact investors. What can we do? Well, I think, first of all, we need to change our perspective. We need to change our perspective because so far we have been preoccupied with the question, how can we maximize the amount of our capital that we've got to invest to be directed to impact? In the future, the question that we are going to face is, how can we maximize the impact with the capital that we are ready to invest? And it's totally okay to have constraints on that capital. You can have your constraints on risk. You can have your expectations of minimum return. But you cannot escape the question of how can you, within those constraints of the risk that you're capable of taking and the returns that you can sustain, how within those constraints can you maximize the impact? It is not anymore a question of seeking opportunistically impact that happens to fit the risk-return allocation of your portfolio. It is a question of choosing deliberately the impact that is needed and finding solutions on how to fund that. And that is not a role that we have, that we can delegate to X, Y, to a financial intermediary. We are the community that needs to challenge that. And actually, what we need to do is we need to step beyond the stage where we are just there to challenge. We need to contribute to finding solutions. In a nutshell, we need to step out of the sandbox that we have been in for the last 10, 15 years. We need to stop to be self-complacent with the fact that some big financial institutions fancy what we are doing because they find us cute. If we want to be part of the change, we need to accept that we are not somewhere pointing at a system that doesn't function. We are part of the system. And if the system collapses, we are part of the fall. So, we need to get to the questions how we can step up our game to move beyond challenging and finding solutions. How we can propose solutions that actually work at scale as entrepreneurs who want to change the world, and also as impact investors, how can we mobilize the capital that is needed to achieve this impact that we're pursuing? What I invite you to do for today, for the discussions that we're going to have today, but for what you're taking with you when you move home from here and into your organizations and into your communities and your societies, that you consider that this is not a question about alternative ways of investing. We are not an alternative way of investing. We are the only alternative. We must be mainstream. If we are not, we will not matter. Thank you very much.